Welcome back to the Whole Lawyer Podcast. This is episode 30, and we are kicking off episode 30 with a reoccurring segment with the Atom Bomb. And this is where we break down the global stories shaping culture, entertainment, and everyday life. And listen, when it comes to international relations, geopolitics, and the ripple effects that hit us right here at home, Adam Sadick Esquire is the one person who can take a complicated issue and make it make sense. So welcome back to the podcast, Mr. Adam Sadick Esquire. Welcome back, brother.
Thank you, Mr. Akeem Earl Esquire. I appreciate you, man. Thank you for that introduction.
Sure.
I do what I can, man. I do love talking about this. It's one of my favorite things to discuss and read about. So I'm happy to be back. Hopefully, look forward to coming back in the future too.
Oh, of course. You're definitely going to be back. And if you want to hear Adam's backstory and how he became a lawyer, his path, which is a different aspect of this podcast, go back to episode 27. We break it down. We go into how he got here, his background. But today we're diving into something that has been on both of our minds. Is based around the Riyadh Festival. And if you don't know, this is a comedy festival that was put on by Saudi Arabia. And the comedians that were hired by the Saudi Arabian government were the likes of Dave Chappelle, Kevin Hart, Pete Davidson, Aziz Ansari. And it had gotten so much backlash from the society in general because how people felt about the Saudi Arabian government and the fact that American entertainers are taking money from the government. So I sent it to the guy that knows all the stuff about international relations. And he was like, oh, this is perfect bet. It's right up my alley. So it is not just with comedy, it's with entertainment overall. We like dove deep and it was like, oh, Saudi Arabia is trying to touch entertainment in general. So and I found that the name of it is called sports washing, but it's really entertainment washing because it's touching golf, women's basketball, NBA basketball, boxing, and then even comedy. And is basically a government trying to get rid of its history and its past by putting on these entertainment spectacles. So everybody's like, oh, no, I like to watch golf, but you don't know who's putting it on. So to kick things off, Adam, please break down the Saudi Arabian past. What are they trying to wash? What are they trying to mull over? And then we'll get into the other topics.
So in my opinion, there's really two prongs to this. One is what you described, sort of as sports washing. There's other types of washing as well. There's, there's pink washing, green washing, basically just one, government laundering its image by, promoting one thing or the other, or presenting or trying to present, one thing or the other. And that's for political purposes. I mean, the Saudi rulers are not dumb. They realize that their name has pretty poor standing generally, I think. Your typical American, or honestly anyone overseas, really. I mean, I would imagine that the first thing they think of when they think of Saudi Arabia is, maybe they may think of oil, and then after that they may think of, women being arrested for going out in public and not wearing the abaya, or for driving, or sorts of other things. I mean, but Saudi Arabia is very much a deeply authoritarian country. And part of the anger over this Riyadh Festival was just the hypocrisy of them being the hosts. I mean, you have, stand-up comedy is sort of like this, a very pure expression of free speech. That you deal with all sorts of taboos, and you satirize politicians and culture and religion and all these things. That's sort of at the foundations of stand-up comedy. But you're hosting it in this country that will put people in jail for life or execute them for simple things such as tweets or writing op-eds about global affairs. This is a very common occurrence, and if viewers, if you're interested in learning more about this, Amnesty International, all sorts of human rights organizations, they're very frequently reporting on this. And on one organization in particular, it's called Al-Qist, in English, that would just be ALQST. They're a human rights organization focusing on Saudi Arabia, and they're constantly monitoring the situation and providing pretty grim outlooks on what the human rights situation is over there. They have essentially what it comes down to is they have a very poor record is by, you know, not just by regional standards, but generally. I mean, even minors will be executed for things like subversion or terrorism. Very common occurrence. Some of the female protesters who were protesting their inability to drive, they were put in jail, put on house arrest. Again, this is you know, I can only rattle off so much at once, but if you're interested in more, please, viewers, go read look at these sources that I just mentioned.
And that's
very frequent.
And that's enough. And you're so crazy. The things you listed is enough, but it sometimes feels like you need to list 7 things for it to be enough. Like, just killing minors should be like that. That's the line. But it feels like when it comes to these conversations, it's like, oh, that's it. Oh, it's just the hijab, or it's just them killing this person, or it's just censoring this. It feels like you have to. If you don't have 10 things, then your argument doesn't sound as firm enough. But you could just stop at one thing and be like, no, this is wrong.
That's exactly right. And I mean, on the subject of stopping at one thing, I mean, that's just barely scratching the surface. That right now we're just talking about their domestic policy. That's not even getting into what they've been doing overseas in the region and elsewhere. One thing in particular that I think was kind of churned up during the whole controversy of the Riyadh Festival was the Saudi Arabian state's involvement in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I mean, I feel like it's somewhat well known that most of the hijackers were either from Saudi Arabia or Egypt. So there's there, and they're all even back around the time of 9/11. There were some dubious, facts that were coming out that would, you know, linking Saudi government officials to the hijackers. And I think in 2017, the FBI authored a report on this. It was just recently declassified during the Biden administration, and it tied one an asset of the Saudi intelligence services. I forget his full name, but I know his last name is Bayoumi, Bayoume. For those who want to read up on this more, he actually had very close contact, and actually, I think he actually was paying the rent of some of the Saudi hijackers that were in the United States prior to the attacks. And this asset, he was actually paid directly by a man by the name of Bandar bin Sultan, who was at one point the Saudi ambassador to the United States, very powerful, very influential member of the royal family. And so what all of that raised is like, okay, clearly Saudi Arabian government, before they would say, oh, you know, we may have had loose ties to these hijackers through, you know, our intelligence services, but we didn't know what they were planning. But this new revelation kind of undercuts that argument significantly, like that really highlights the ties that the Saudi government had to the hijackers. So that's one thing. Another very more important thing that was in the news a few years back, more than recently, but Saudi Arabia was one of the main architects and executors of the war on Yemen, which started in 2015. I don't want to spend too much time on the background, but long story short, this was a brutal, savage war that was spearheaded by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates against the so-called Houthi rebels who came from northern Yemen originally. I don't want to get too bogged down in the history, but long story short, there was a revolution in Yemen during the Arab Spring in 2011, I believe, that led to sort of a short to medium term power sharing arrangement that was overseen by the UN. The Houthis, eventually the government that was in power, it was supposed to be just a caretaker government, was only supposed to be in power for so long. They extended their mandate, so they stayed in power longer than they were supposed to under the UN framework agreement. So the Houthis launched an armed insurgency against them, and they took over most of the country. So Saudi Arabia launched this war with, you know, the blessing of the UN Security Council and the full backing of the United States, Great Britain, and also controversially Israel. Israel was a big backer of the Saudi war in Yemen. And again, long story short, hundreds of thousands of innocent people were killed. The country was just utterly destroyed. Diseases that were that had been eradicated came back, like the measles and others. There was at one point it was the worst humanitarian disaster in the world. And one thing that's interesting, for those viewers who have been following what's happening in Gaza, a lot of the same, you know, in some respects, in my opinion, what happened in Yemen was sort of like the blueprint for what Israel was doing in Gaza. You see a lot of the same tactics were used. The targeting of civilian infrastructure, bombing of schools and hospitals, a total humanitarian blockade. For a while, Saudi Arabia was blockading. Yemen has one port from which it was they got most of their humanitarian aid importing goods abroad. It was the port city of Al Hudaydah. That was under total blockade, and it was repeatedly bombed by Saudi Arabia to keep it knocked out of commission. The constant risk of famine and starvation, and again, the constant humanitarian crisis because they were blocking medical aid from coming in. So a lot of what you saw in you're continuing to see in Gaza was also going on much longer period in Yemen. Although I would, again, I don't want to lose track, but I think what's happening in Gaza is much worse for other reasons. But in many ways, Yemen provided a blueprint. So that, it's not just Saudi Arabia's domestic policies, but it's also what they've been doing in the region. And they've also in the background for the last few decades, Saudi Arabia has, the reason that we have the Saudi Arabian government is, they basically teamed up with the British to kick the Ottoman Empire out of parts of the Middle East during World War One. But the ruling family of what will become Saudi Arabia, the House of Al Saud, they had an internal alliance with they basically became wedded to a religious movement in Saudi Arabia that was known as Wahhabism. There's this guy by the name of Abdul Wahhab who was kind of like basically the Muslim version of an evangelical, extremely hardline revivalist, ultra conservative, and I bring that up because in the last few decades, part of what Saudi Arabia has been doing is exporting their, essentially interpretation of Islam abroad, in places like Egypt and Pakistan, and some of the biggest funding for what we refer to as fundamentalist groups like Al Qaeda, their affiliates elsewhere, has come from Saudi Arabia. So all of that together, I mean, the Saudi brand is just toxic.
Yeah.
So that's part of why you're seeing this. So it's very. Oh, and another thing too is Saudi Arabia is one of the biggest spenders on lobbying in the United States. I think Qatar, another Gulf country, which is not too different. I mean, they have a much smaller footprint in international affairs than Saudi Arabia does for a number of reasons, but they're also have a brutal human rights situation. I want to say Saudi Arabia they're definitely top 5. I want to say top 3, but they spend massive amounts on lobbying in the United States and elsewhere. So that's I would say that's one. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, you're good. So you said something very specific. I like the Saudi Arabian brand. So now there's this narrative that the new Turki al-Sheikh, I'm probably messing up his name, but they're saying that he's different. He's trying to change the Saudi Arabian brand. They're no longer, people acknowledge what Saudi Arabia has done in the past. They reference it as past Saudi Arabia. Like these are things of old. And Turki al-Sheikh is now trying to change things. He's not as bad. He allows women to not have to wear the things, or there's certain like liberal ideologies that he has that's now changing the Saudi Arabian brand. And part of that branding is doing the entertainment washing, is doing the Riyadh Comedy Festival, is doing Live Golf. Like they bought Live Golf and took over the PGA Tour brand, the WNBA lead Players Association president took a deal with him. Boxing, they put on so many boxing events. I love boxing, so I watch Terrence Crawford and all these different boxers put on box at these events. So it feels like he's trying to rebrand. Is it a true rebrand, or is it just smoke and mirrors?
It is absolutely not a true rebrand. And the data and the figures speak for themselves. I mean, this is really it's a sort of a superficial, like, ooh, look at this shiny object here, and don't pay attention to what's really going on in the background. That's my take on it. And like I was mentioning, anyone can just read the reports from the major human rights monitors, like Amnesty International, the United Nations. Look, to his credit, I mean, there have been some relatively minor advances. Like he's two that I can think of just off the top of my head. He Mohammed bin Salman, who is technically he's not even really the by law the ruler of Saudi Arabia. It's his father, the king is actually the ruler, but he's just the crown prince. But it's all understood that he calls the shots, and he is the minister of defense, and so he does. He's the one who calls the shots. But getting back to the on point, it's very much just a surface level reforms. Like he's diminished one thing. He's diminished the role of the so-called moral police. There was basically just a domestic police force that went around making sure that the general population was observing Saudi religious norms and customs, making sure women and men weren't sort of commingling in certain spaces. Women were dressing appropriately, men dressing appropriately. He's curtailed them a little bit, and he's made other sort of surface level reforms, like allowing women to drive. But even that, I mean, it's funny. Women can drive in Saudi Arabia, but some of the leading human rights figures and protest leaders who led the charge in this, they were jailed. Some of them, I believe, are still in jail for this. So that tells you right now, it's
even though he
it's all about the image. It's not
conformed to what they were. Even though they actually conformed to what they were fighting for, he still didn't let them out of prison.
Right.
It's like the marijuana thing in the U.S., where it's like it's now legal in the U.S., but we still have all these people locked up for weed possession.
Right, exactly, and we still continue to charge people with marijuana related offenses in certain situations. Right. It's still illegal to possess and distribute in some ways. And people still have all these convictions on their record that haven't been expunged. So and it's very similar. There's a lot of layers to that. So I think, but all of that, like we've been saying, it's belied by the actual human rights situation on the ground. I mean, who really? I mean, I don't want to belittle the women's struggle over it. That's not what I'm trying to say here. But who cares if women can drive if women are also being put in prison for life for tweeting? Maybe the government should treat women a little better. Or sentencing people to death on terrorism charges for just analyzing Saudi foreign policy, right? In a news article. I mean, really little things like tamping down the morality police and allowing them to drive. I mean, those are just lost in the rest of what's happening over there, and in their foreign relations as well. I would add. So yeah, that's it really. These are surface level reforms. Some reforms have been made, but they are lost. These are like teardrops in the rain of the rest of the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. So I would not expect much genuine reform from Mohammed bin Salman. And
it's
sorry, go ahead.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. No, finish up. Go ahead.
I was going to say, so what I started with earlier is that there are kind of two prongs to this. There's like the political, sports washing, PR side. But there's also, in my opinion, and again, I'm by no means an expert on this, but I think there's also an economic dimension as well, because all of these involve a lot of investment from Saudi Arabia and outside investment. I think part of the reason that you're seeing a lot of this, you're seeing the Riyadh Comedy Festival, you're seeing the Live Golf League, and the parallel WNBA association, and the royal family buying soccer teams like Newcastle United. I mean, part of this is they also want to diversify their economy. Saudi Arabia is one of the world's largest exporters of petroleum. It's the backbone of their economy. I think 25% of their GDP is in some ways attributable to the industry, the energy sector, and I think. And one of the things that Mohammed bin Salman has brought to the table is this so-called, Project 2023, which is where he wants to sort of complete the modernization of the Saudi economy, but more importantly, diversify it so that it's not fully dependent on oil. Because listen, if oil prices go well, that means if oil is the backbone of your economy and oil prices are high, your economy is going to do well. If oil is the backbone of your economy and oil prices are low, your economy is going to be in the shitter. And two really important examples of that would be Venezuela and Russia. Venezuela during in the early 2000s under Hugo Chavez, they had an economic boom because the price of oil was high, but he failed to diversify the economy. His government was extremely corrupt. And so all that wealth was really squandered, and they've kind of been in economic turmoil since then. It also had U.S. sanctions. Russia, kind of a similar story as well. I mean, when oil is doing well, the Russian economy is doing well. When it's not, it's not. So I think they've seen that, and they've seen the writing on the wall. They say, listen, we need to do something about this. So I think in my opinion, I think part of this is in keeping with that goal of diversifying the economy. They want money to be coming into the Saudi coffers from other sources. So in my opinion, I think that's another dimension to this as well. It's not just PR propaganda, but there's also like an investment strategy behind it as well. So I thought that was relevant to mention too.
No, that's extremely relevant, but it makes it also interesting why they had a conversation of like, okay, we need to diversify our income, and they go for entertainment. That just speaks to the power of entertainment, the amount of money these things bring in. Like you said, soccer, boxing, WNBA, NBA, golf, comedy. Is like they didn't think about like import and exports. They didn't say, let's do bananas. Let's make cotton, or like let's make a little widget. They said, we're going for entertainment. Why do you think that is? Why do you think? And also, it's like they went for entertainment, and they felt like this angle would work on people, that people would actually forget all the things that they've done and all the evil that they've done if we just get their eyes and their attention and get on these as distractions. I don't want to like just label a broad stroke like, oh, these things are only distractions, but they know people like to escape through these things. People like to watch comedy to escape, or sports to escape, whatever it may be. And it's profound, almost, that they said this is where we should go to. Let's capture the minds of these people, because we know that you're not going to care who puts on the event if you're watching Dave Chappelle. You just want to watch Dave Chappelle. You're not going to care who Phil mix who Phil. I mess up the name, Laura. You're not going to care who Terrence Crawford is fighting under. You're not going to care what company he's fighting for. You just want to see Terrence Crawford fight. And that's so interesting how they understand that. Maybe it's the same thing with like, we don't know who makes our phones. We don't know who makes our mouse pad or our keyboard, but we're still going to buy it anyway because it's a necessity. And it's interesting that they recognize that and they capitalize off of that.
No, that's an excellent point. I think that that's part of the strategy as well, especially with the sports too. And Saudis, they're I think I mentioned this earlier. They're not the only ones who caught on to this. But people in the Emirates and Qatar, they've also bought up majority stakes in a lot of big sports teams. So Qatar, one of the members of their ruling family, he bought the club Paris Saint-Germain, which was, I mean, and the huge infusion of capital. They're now one of the biggest clubs in the world. They have huge star power. Lionel Messi even played for them for a little while after they were bought by the Qataris. The Emiratis, they bought the team Manchester City in the UK, who again they've won the Premier League multiple times. They won the Champions League. They are now a household name when they were in mostly obscurity, I think, before that, except around like the 60s and 70s, I think. And so I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, like, and for a lot of different cultures, like, yeah, listen, like that Saturday evening soccer game is like, that's, people live for that. So, they're not going to care really to a certain extent who is putting this on or who is profiting from this. So it's kind of, and another important thing is that, this gives you a captive audience. I mean, sports and entertainment generally, these are a bonanza for advertisers. That it's just guaranteed, money for whoever is. Advertisers are going to fork out tens of millions and millions of dollars and euros just to be seen at these sporting events. So I think there's that's an angle as well. There's a lot of money, but also like what you're saying, I think there's part of it is that, maybe subconsciously, you are gonna, you may end up, going to one of these games, watching the events, and then, associating them with Saudi Arabia. So instead of thinking, when you think of Saudi Arabia, throwing activists in jail or banning this, that, the other, you're like, oh, Saudi Arabia. Oh yeah, Newcastle. Yeah, of course. So I think there's that they're angling for that as well. And like you said, sports and entertainment, that's a very natural way to accomplish that. But Yeah, it's very interesting, and I mean, I'm curious to see how, how well this is going to play out over time for them. What's interesting to me is that, in the last few years, they really, they went on a spending spree, getting really famous footballers from, I mean, the big soccer teams in Europe, to come play in the Saudi league. Ronaldo, who plays there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest was Neymar. I mean, when Neymar, the Brazilian soccer player, who came from PSG, which was, owned by the Qataris. I'm pretty sure when they brought him
Mm-hmm.
over, I mean, first of all, like, they gave him an exorbitant contract, hundreds of millions
Mm-hmm.
of reals or euros. And I think they bought him a mansion, and they bought him his own private jet. So that
Jeez.
tells you, like, how seriously they're taking this. I mean, they really see this stuff as a
Yeah.
major investment. And they wouldn't be making those major investments if they didn't think that it was going to pay off. So it's, yeah, they're like, but I guess
Yeah.
why I brought that is actually Neymar ended up leaving. I think he went back to
Mm-hmm.
the first club where he made his name, Santos in Brazil. And some of the players who did go over there for the paychecks, they're starting to trickle back. So that got me thinking, well, how long
Mm-hmm.
is that going to last? And it remains to be seen. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
And
Those are two things I want to get to. So you talked about the amount of money that they gave. First, you're right, and they're doing this across all sports and comedy thing. The reason why these comedians went over there for the Riyadh Festival is because they were offering them $1 million for one show. This, and even the lower tier comedians got offered 375K, and I'm like, that's a lot of money for, like, what, a 30-minute stand up, because other people got to perform, so you're not even performing for that long. You're not getting that in the U.S. So
right.
Colin Coward, he's a sports analyst on Fox station, and he was talking on this thing, and he said,
Mm-hmm.
"You notice how people have morals. You notice the people who have morals never been offered really cool stuff." And he was speaking to the Live Golf and PGA Tour merger, where at first PGA Tour was speaking to Live Golf, who was owned by the Saudi government, saying, our golfers shouldn't go over there. Have some moral standing. Like, where's your morals? Where's your standing? Don't you understand what they're doing? And the response is, I'm being offered millions of dollars. You're only saying that, or you're trying to have some moral high ground because you're not getting the money. And it feels like there's a lot of conversation that sounds like, first of all, everybody has a price. That's what it tells me. Like, you're willing to do stuff, or you're willing to not do stuff unless somebody gives you a big number. And even Colin Cowherd was speaking to the fact that he's like, oh, they offered me some money to call one of the games, but I turned it down. But he said, but if they offered me 5 million, I would have to have a conversation with my wife. I would have to talk about it, whatever. And it feels like, if you have some ought, or if you feel like calling out something wrong with this government and the things that they're doing, you wouldn't be saying that if you were faced with a $10 million offer. And it also feels like we should probably ignore things, or things can't be that bad, or shouldn't be that bad, or you shouldn't make things such a big deal if money is being offered at that level. And it's such an interesting dynamic, because it feels like, so are we not supposed to call out things that are wrong? Are we not supposed to acknowledge things that is just straight up evil because you're getting paid a high amount of money? I'm supposed to just ignore that? Like, oh, that makes sense. It makes sense that you took that because that's a lot of money. And not just because I'm not in the situation. I would like to think there's some people in the world that, even if they were faced with a $10 million offer, no, I do not want to perform for you. You just beheaded a reporter for having views that are opposite from you. You just did this to a child, or you just did this to women. Like, there has to be some line.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying, and it's a very relevant point in a lot of different ways, right? I mean, so people, athletes, entertainers, they're dealing with this on their end, but we have lots of analogs here, in the U.S. and in different sectors as well, right? I mean, just think of attorneys in the field of law, right? I mean, like, listen, at the end of the day, in the type of society that we have, money talks, bullshit walks. cash rules everything
mm-hmm.
around me. Like, I look at corporate, big law. All right. If you go that route, obviously you're going to work your ass off, but you're going to be making a lot of money representing some pretty terrible people and institutions. And, on the other hand, the folks in public interest, they're not making that kind of money. And maybe they're advocating for causes that are slightly, more benevolent, and, not evil, you might say. But this is something that everybody faces, not just over there, but in every society. I think where it's somebody at some point is making that calculation. Like, do I take the money and live a convenient, comfortable life, or do I stick to my morals and what I believe is right, and forego that privilege and the luxury that comes with serving those interests? So it's I mean, I don't know. I guess basically comes down to like what you believe or not. I mean, I think that there are some people with principles in this regard, but it's also, I mean, it's really hard. It's hard for the the athletes and the entertainers, but it's also hard on the people that consume as well, because they have an ethical dilemma as well. Like, let's say I don't really like the Saudi Arabian government, but I'm a big fan of Newcastle. And ever since, they bought Newcastle, Newcastle's been doing pretty well. They've been finishing like top 4 or 5. They bought some big names. You're like, shit, like, man, I hate the Saudi government, but man, my team has never done so well. Like, I'm sure people who are supporters of Man City and PSG, they feel the same way. Like, this blood money, petrodollars is coming in and dirtying up the sport, and it's bad for like competition reasons. All the clubs that have the foreign ownership, they're drowning in money, whereas the local clubs, they can't really do shit. They can barely compete as it is. Most of them are indebted. They can't bring in these stars from Brazil and Spain, Italy, etc. But it's corrosive to everyone and everything. Because now obviously the athlete are in a certain position, but the consumer as well. So it's
for sure.
It's unfortunate. But unfortunately, I think that it's just I don't really see an end to that unless the people who are really concerned about this and for them it's a matter of principle and are willing to fight for, unless they can get together and organize, then they might be able to put a stop to it. But it's just, there's just so much money. Everybody's making so much money off of this. It's just really hard to see it changing on its own, at least, without some type of outside agitation.
It's funny you talk about it's funny you talk about Newcastle, because I was just about to say the reason why I think you said Lionel Messi or one of them left is also about the quality of the entertainment too, and it's probably why they have their hands in so many different sports, because if one doesn't hit, I have 4 more that I'm going to try to make money off of. Because their boxing events, personally, events just don't feel the same. Like when Terence Crawford or Tank or other people were boxing, and like Turki Al-Sheikh was in the front row, it felt very weird. Like he went in the middle. It felt like they were like a very much a somber, bowing, respectful thing, and he just like floated around the place, and everybody was just so. It was such a weird thing, but. And it was also a big spectacle, like you said. They have money, man. Like big spectacle, lights, all the things, but it didn't feel the same. Like it didn't feel like I was watching it on ESPN or even like a pay-per-view. So and that's probably why other soccer players left, because like the competition doesn't feel the same, the vibe doesn't feel the same, the fans are different. Maybe even though the money's good, I don't feel like I'm competing at the highest level here.
Right. A couple points on that. Actually, that's a really interesting point that you jogged my memory about something. I think some journalist, I forget her name, but she wrote, she was writing for The Atlantic, which I don't really like or respect at all, but this is a really interesting article. I think she was at the Riyadh Comedy Festival, and she was basically giving a review, and she was also laying out sort of the controversy around it from her perspective. And she noted that at the festival, one of the first things that stuck out to her was that no booze. Like as someone who has done stand up, I've dabbled at a couple open mics before. Like when you're going
to
for real
alcohol.
Yeah, a couple
Adam,
times.
Adam,
Back in the
you've
day.
done stand. Wait, what?
No.
I did not know that. What?
Yeah, right. That came out of left field, but so nothing like serious. Like I've done a couple sets at like open mics and stuff. Because and I've taken some improv classes because it was fun. Yeah, we can have another episode about this one day.
Oh yeah, we got to. That's funny as hell. Now, okay.
But the reason I mention that is it's like, listen, like even from the entertainer's perspective, like you want people to be drunk, you want people, or at least like drinking. It gets the spirits flowing. It's easier to get laughs. And she was like, that was weird. Like there was nobody was drinking alcohol. Obviously, Saudi Arabia, they weren't going to serve it. That same thing came up when Qatar hosted the World Cup. It was like, what? We could go into these soccer games, nobody's drunk. Like, what is this? And the tone in her, I obviously I didn't see the show, so I have no personal knowledge of this, but she was saying that the tone and the rhetoric of the performers was a lot toned down. It wasn't as raunchy as some of the other stuff. So it's like that's one to your point. It's like it almost, what I took from that is for her it felt like didn't even feel like the real thing. It was like this cheap imitation, the idea of stand-up comedy rather than actual stand-up comedy. So you got me thinking about that as well. That was a very interesting point to me, which makes sense. I mean, like a country like Saudi Arabia isn't gonna have people making jokes about politics and politicians and war and religion and all these controversial taboo topics that make comedy so awesome, really. So that's one thing. Another thing is oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, finish. Go ahead.
I was gonna say also too is one thing that has just been a constant joke. I tend to follow soccer more than I follow other sports, but it's one thing that everyone who follows soccer understands that going to play in Saudi Arabia is it's basically early retirement. Like you're gonna get a shit ton of money to play at a very low, embarrassing. I'm not trying to disrespect Saudi athletes, but comparing the Saudi league to the Premier League in England or even La Liga in Spain or Serie A in Italy, to say apples to orange. I mean, it's like NFL, comparing the NFL to intramural high school flag football or something like that. I mean, these guys are going over there. Yeah. I'm sure it's entertaining to watch these stars play, but they're not playing at a competitive level. I mean, they have to be bored at a certain point, just playing at the level that they are. So it's it's honest. It's also but that's, it's like, oh, never. I thought I had a point in my head, but basically it's almost demeaning to the art itself and the sport itself.
Exactly.
You're going playing at this low level just for money. That let's be fucking fair. That's the only reason that they're going there is for money. That's the only reason the star, a 25-year-old star in the Premier League or in Ligue 1 in France would ever go to Saudi Arabia is the money, So that's an important thing for me as well. It's dude, so there's this you give a moral dilemma to the players and the fans. But also you're doing a disservice to the sport because you're seeing all these people with all this talent go play in a league where they're not even what are you doing, man? Who wants to do that? So those are interesting points as well.
Unfortunately. It's interesting you said that about the Riyadh Comedy Festival because it was in the comedians' contracts that they couldn't talk about two things. I think it was the politics, the government, and something else, but it was something related to the country. And I think I forgot who it was, but one of the comedians was like, "Oh, I don't joke about those things anyway, so I'll be fine." So, but it's interesting that the article you spoke to, even though the comedians felt like, "Oh, I don't joke about these things anyway, I can still be myself and it'll still be funny," it still felt limited. I think in the same article, she was talking about how he made a DUI joke and they don't even drink, or he made a certain joke, but it didn't resonate with the crowd because the things are funny because it's relatable. The reason why we laugh is because there's some truth to it. So if you're going over there, you're trying to skirt around what's really going on in the country, the crowd isn't going to relate to it because they don't find any truth to it. You're just rattling off jokes that nobody in your audience can relate to. And like you said, it messes up the art. Now it's not funny. It messes up the art form. And even with other sports, like I said, with boxing, maybe that's the saving grace. Maybe that's what solves this thing. Or maybe that's what stops this fake rebranding of Saudi Arabia, where they're trying so hard to get into these spaces through monetary means and through these very superficial means, but people still love the art form. People still love the art of golfing, the art of comedy, the art of basketball, the art of boxing. So if they're seeing this and watching these events, I'm like, this feels fake. This doesn't feel real. I don't want to tune in. And that's kind of tough too, because I mean, this is not for moral reasons. It's not they're not tuning out because like, oh, I'm vehemently against how you guys operate in this world. It's more so like, I don't like your product. But it's so hard when you talk about these things because we're talking about millions and billions of people who have been so trained and programmed. We've all been programmed to enjoy these things and not really care, not really take the time to dive deep into what we're consuming and who's producing the stuff that we're consuming. That sometimes it just ends up on like, if it's not a good product, I don't want to see it. And it's hard to reconcile that. It's hard to reconcile that.
No, for sure, for sure. And actually, you made me think of a couple points. I mean, one, going back to the issue of like, limiting what you can joke about at the outset. I mean, that's just like massive hypocrisy and moral compromise.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't joke about it, so it's fine. I mean, like, what? That's basically like, it's not the same, but it's like, you want to throw these people in jail? Oh, I'm not them. Like, I don't care. That's just like, especially when it comes to comedy, like. Comedy is an arena where you hear so much rhetoric about free speech and like, oh, I'm being canceled for this, or people are boycotting me because I made this joke, that, the other. Like, so you're just gonna brush all that aside and say, oh, it's fine. I'm not gonna joke about this. I don't want to do it anyway. I mean, that's, to me, that's just a massive artistic and moral compromise. Like, I don't know. I'd have to look into like which specific comedians said or did this, but I can't, like, that's just there's no justification for that. To me. It just sounds like massive hypocrisy.
For sure.
But also, like, what's interesting is that, like, I hate to segue into like a part that's not a topic that's not directly on point, but like one thing that like I was kind of hoping is that, like, through all of this, like all this controversy about the Riyadh Festival, the Live, and which it turns out they may be. I know they're in negotiations for a merger, so it sounds like there's not as much as hostility as there was before, but it hasn't all gone away yet. But with the boxing, with the buying up the Premier Leagues, bringing buying up the soccer teams and bringing soccer players into Saudi Arabia. Like, what I was kind of hoping is that this would not only trigger people to start thinking about what the Saudi Arabian government does, but going back to the roots of, wait, why are we even talking about Saudi Arabia in the first place? Like, why are they relevant? And that is a discussion that I think Americans need to have more than anything else, because why are we talking about Saudi Arabia? Like, why is Saudi Arabia so important? And I think once you start looking into that, why is the U.S. even involved in the Middle East? I mean, these are all interconnected. And I think once you start examining those questions, you really start hitting on the really hard.
So that's perfect. Let's close out with that. Tell us, why are we even talking about Saudi Arabia, and why should the people who are listening to this episode, why should they care? Let's close out with that. It's perfect.
Perfect. So Saudi Arabia is, contrary to some popular beliefs, Saudi Arabia is actually the United States' oldest ally. Well, oldest partner in the Middle East. Basically, between the world wars, crude oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia. And I'm going to be paraphrasing, like, there's 100 years of history to go through. I encourage people to do their own research and familiarize themselves with the facts. But just for the purposes of time, I'm going to give like as brief a summary as I can. Basically, Saudi Arabia has the cheapest, the most plentiful, and the most easily accessible oil reserves in the world. I mean, they don't have the most. I think they're number 2, but you take a bendy straw and stick it in the sand, like, you're gonna hit oil. So it's just and why is that important? Well, obviously we're still in the period of fossil fuels, and since the interoil period we've been that way. So state planners here in the United States and in Britain and France, the so-called first world, they've always recognized that whoever controls international energy supplies will in turn control the world economy, and whoever controls the world economy is going to basically rule the world. And that's basically the conclusion that was made by the State Department and American state planners in the interwar period. Actually, you can look at the declassified documentary record and you'll see officials from the State Department saying things that, like Saudi Arabia, and this is a verbatim quote: Saudi Arabian oil is a stupendous source of strategic power and the greatest material prize in world history, and a lever of world control. All right, so the idea is that if you can control Saudi Arabia's oil reserves, you will control the world economy, and you will basically run the world. And there's a lot there's a lot more nuance. There's a lot more history to discuss. But it's not about actually the oil, right? We're not there because of the oil. The United States is a net exporter of oil. We have our own oil, and actually, in fact, we've at various points in our history, we've been an exporter of oil. Actually, Obama in the modern period bragged about this. He was like, oh, yeah, I think he said, oh, that's me, people. Like, this whole idea of energy independence. But that's not why we're involved. It has nothing to do with the actual oil. It really has two things. One, since Saudi Arabia has, one of the biggest oil revenues, most profitable energy sectors in the entire world, it's about making sure that the money from their energy sector gets reinvested in ways that benefit the United States. We want them buying American weapons. We want them buying American real estate. We want them investing in American companies, bringing in consultants, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we basically want all that money in some form or another to come back to New York and London. That's one side. And the other side is about Noam Chomsky described it as keeping your hand on the faucet of oil, right? So if you basically control the oil reserves, or have political control over the countries with the biggest oil reserves, you will have your hand on the faucet of oil. And what do we mean by that? Well, you basically can control the price of oil. And in turn, you can that can be a very powerful weapon. Either increasing or limiting the supply of oil can destroy the economies of other countries. And so basically, when we have relied on Saudi Arabia, not just Saudi Arabia, but the other OPEC countries as well, like Iran, when they were under a military dictatorship backed by the U.S. under the Shah. We spoke a little bit about this the last episode. They were involved in this too. Kuwait, very much. We use that as a political weapon against our enemies. And actually, one of the biggest examples of that was in 2015, when Russia invaded the Crimea in Ukraine. Obama went to Saudi Arabia and was like, all right, we need you to increase the production of oil, because increase the production of oil means the price of oil drops. And at one point, after Russia had attacked Ukraine, they were losing, I think it was like over $1 billion a day. Because of all the oil that was the cheap oil that was flooding the market, and that was a way to punish Russia. Wow. So that's another way as well. So that's really what it called. And you can, again, this is a lot of paraphrasing and a lot of summarizing, but basically since the interwar period to now, it's basically a history of the United States preserving that. After World War II, the United States was the predominant world superpower. I mean, about half of the world's wealth was in American hands in one way or another, and we totally controlled Middle East oil. We had kicked out the French and kicked out the British. I mean, they had some concessions in Kuwait and other places, but we were predominantly, we were by far the biggest player. And so basically, in order to preserve our control over the global energy supplies, we've maintained good relations with Saudi Arabia. Not just with Saudi Arabia, but with Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, all these other countries at varying points, as well as, and also in the Caribbean countries as well. I mean, Venezuela, for most of its, at least most of the last century, has been, an American protectorate. And so, yeah, basically the history of the last, 100 years or so has been a history of the U.S. trying to preserve that relationship. And what it actually ends up happening is that silent agreement. Like, look, you, Saudi Arabia, you take all that money and you invest it in ways that benefit the United States. And in return, we are going to guarantee the security of your regimes. And those of you who follow history closely, you'll notice that, like, in the Middle East, especially the last decade or so, there's been a lot of volatility in a lot of these different countries, but a lot of stability in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Qatar, the UAE, in these, oil and natural gas, producing countries. And that's part of that's part of why. I mean, they get ironclad American security guarantees that other countries that are not as strategically important do not get. And again, there's a lot of nuance there. It's not as simple as that. And there have been times where Saudi Arabia has exerted some independence, especially under MBS. Actually, they've been asserting themselves in the world of international affairs in ways that they have not, in ways that and they've shown some independence. Like, for a couple examples, Saudi Arabia recently, I think it was either 2023, 2022, they joined, I think it's called the Shanghai Cooperation Association, which is basically just an economic and political agreement of countries that's basically brings them closer with China, closer bilateral relations and strategic partnerships. They've had a reconciliation agreement that was brokered by China with Iran, who Iran has always been Saudi Arabia's chief rival since the Iranian Revolution of 1979. They've basically been in a cold war with them, especially in places like Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, where they've both had competing interests. In fact, we were talking about the Yemen war earlier in the episode. The Houthis, who staged that takeover in 2015, they were loosely backed by Iran. They do get some weapons and trainings. They're not. I wouldn't say that they're an Iranian proxy, but they do have close ties. And part of the rationale of Saudi Arabia and the UAE destroying Yemen basically was to limit, in their words, the influence of Iran. And they basically Saudi Arabia and Iran were fighting a proxy war in Syria. They were both backing rival groups. So Iran was backing the dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad and a lot of the Shia militias that were active there. And that's another thing too. Again, I don't want to get too much off track, but Saudi Arabia practices hardline Sunni Islam. In Iran, it's mostly Shia Islam, so there's a sectarian rivalry there as well. But anyway, that was all kind of tampered down by this agreement that China recently brokered. And critically, Saudi Arabia was invited to join the BRICS alliance. And BRICS, to those who don't know, it's an acronym. It's just a sort of an economic political partnership that's led by the BRICS countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And these are sort of the strongest emerging economies in the third world. It's sort of seen as like a rival to the American, Europe, Japan centric international system. So they've made some gestures and actually, after Russia attacked Ukraine again in 2022, what's interesting is that Biden went to Saudi Arabia and he wanted to do what Obama did the first time, but also because of when Russia attacked Ukraine, it had a lot of like ripple effects across the world economy in lots of different ways, and it contributed to inflation. And I think what the administration wanted to do was sort of like ease, and obviously we remember from that time too, oil prices were skyrocketing, and so the Biden administration wanted Saudi Arabia to help that and also punish Russia by increasing oil output. They actually did the opposite. They sharpened it, and that was kind of seen as like an insult to the U.S. and a show of independence by Saudi Arabia. So they've made gestures at independence, but I think deep down, and MBS still wants to play both sides, right? He wants to do what's in his own interests, but he still wants to maintain close ties with both the U.S. and China and Russia as well. And he's trying to play that delicate balance. But I think at the end of the day, he knows that, there's no saying no to the United States. The United States is still just overwhelmingly powerful in terms of its military capabilities, its control of the world economy. If if Saudi Arabia and the other oil producing countries in the Gulf were to go for a solid break from the U.S., we would be seeing some pretty big headlines in the Middle East that would not be taken kind of. In fact, the U.S. basically made it clear to the Soviet Union after World War II. It's like, listen, if you even think about coming for the oil producing regions in the Middle East, like it's going to be nuclear war. And at the in our last episode, I mentioned that the oil producing countries in the Middle East, they're basically to the United States what India was to the British Empire, and that's still very much true today. Not as much because the energy sectors have diversified. The economic outlook today is much different than it was at the end of World War II, but the Middle East is still seen as like the crown jewel of the empire, and whoever controls that still has a very strong degree of control of the world economy and global affairs. So for that reason, we're not going to be abandoning the Middle East anytime soon. But that's sort of the reason why we're even talking about Saudi Arabia, why they're relevant. It all comes back to American control of the region and control of the world. We basically just see them as a stepping stone and have seen them as and again, that's not my opinion. That's literally what our rulers have said time and time again.
Yeah.
Actually, and what's funny actually is sometimes they do say the quiet part out loud, not always directly, but Joe Biden, there's videos of him saying this, like both on like C-SPAN while he was in Congress and as president. He sort of indirectly, he said, if Israel did not exist, then we would need to invent in Israel to defend our interests in the Middle East. And what's interesting is, a lot of people think that the U.S. is close with Israel just because of like, the Jewish lobby and AIPAC and Kufi and Democratic Majority, these other institutions, which are powerful. But you take them out of the equation, the U.S. would still support Israel because, and again, I'm sorry, I'm going all over the place. If you want to,
no, this is
if you need to stop me, feel free. But
this
like,
is perfect. That's good.
The U.S. Israeli relationship really blossomed in the 1960s, not prior. The state of Israel was created in 1948, but around that time, they were only getting very tepid support from the U.S. In fact, there was sort of a split in the federal government as to whether or not they should have supported Israel. The State Department was saying, no, it's terrible. It's horrible PR for the Middle East. And it's going to complicate our relationships with, the newly independent Arab states and the oil producing countries in Saudi Arabia. They're not going to like that. Whereas the Pentagon were like, oh shit, actually Israel did pretty well in the 1948 war. They're a very capable military for a very small, relatively not rich country. Like maybe we should be investing in them. Well, what really made the US hit the gas pedal was in the 1960s, there was basically a Cold War happening in the Arab world. On the one side, you had the Arab nationalists who were led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, who basically they wanted full independence from Europe. They wanted independence from, the dominance and the influence of the United States. And they just basically wanted, again, this is summarizing, but they wanted their economies and national development to be in service of the general population, or at least their own country, which is why a lot of these newly independent countries were nationalizing their oil reserves. In fact, the last episode, we talked a little about how in the early 1950s, the CIA staged a coup in Iran because they had elected a leader, a pretty conservative leader actually, named Mohammed bin Salman, who part of his plans for national development involved nationalizing all the country's energy sector, which obviously British investors, the British oil companies, like hated. Like, no, this is a big problem, so we got rid of him. But what was I saying?
Why they joined? Why the U.S. took interest in Israel in the first place?
Oh, that's right. So basically, I'm sorry. So you had this Cold War between the nationalists on the one side. On the other side, who you have the so-called reactionaries in the conservative countries, led by Saudi Arabia. These guys wanted very good relations with the United States and the West. They're totally fine to give ultimate political control to the U.S. as long as it meant they stay in power and they stay rich. And so there was very big, essentially a Cold War that actually kind of became a hot war in Yemen in the 1960s. Egypt was backing one side in the Yemeni civil war. Saudi Arabia was backing another side. And the United States was extremely worried. They were worried that, an Arab nationalist revolution would come to Saudi Arabia and the other oil producing regions. They were like, oh shit, if that happens, then they're going to nationalize the oil reserves. We're going to be shit out of luck. And we're, that'll be the end of the American empire. So what Israel did then is they basically destroyed Arab nationalism. In 1967, they gave the U.S. a heads up. They're like, hey, are you cool if we attack Egypt, Jordan, and Syria? And the U.S. basically was like, yeah, sure. And so they did. They completely, while Egypt was bogged down in this war in Yemen, they invaded the Sinai Peninsula, just destroyed the Egyptian Air Force. They occupied the West Bank in Palestine. They occupied Gaza. They occupied the Sinai Peninsula. They occupied the Golan Heights in Syria. And that was seen as just like the end of Arab nationalism, which effectively it was. And so they did the United States by ending that civil war. They did the United States a huge favor, and they basically ensured that no revolution coming to the Gulf states anytime soon, no nationalization, no nothing. This is going to be an American region for the foreseeable future. And that is when, and the numbers don't lie. Just take a look at the numbers for American aid, and when if you look at it as a line graph, after 1967, it's going to skyrocket. Whereas before, it's like flat, nothing. They weren't getting. In fact, in the 1948 war, when Israel declared its independence, most of their support wasn't even from the United States. Most of their material support was from Britain, France. And actually, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union thought that Israel was going to be some type of socialist state that they could use for influence in the Middle East. It didn't work out that way. But after 1967, it totally changed, and that's when the relationship that we have with Israel, as we know today, began. And it all goes back to our relationship with Saudi Arabia. So all of this, and the reason I say this is because that provides the context that you need to be aware of when you look at these things with like Saudi Arabia, their image, their investments, their sports washing. That really gives a new dimension to it, and an important one too. And that's kind of what I would like to see people getting to while they're looking at the issues of sports washing and the things that we were talking about earlier. So I'm sorry, that was a very long, rant.
No, it's perfect because you're right, because all that says is the U.S. is playing a game of what have you done for me lately? You're only as good as what you can produce. Because I can imagine if Saudi Arabia just ran out of oil one day, I can imagine the U.S. is like, oh, all right, on to the next. Like, no more protections, no more whatever. Exactly. Yep. And it's all about power. And it's interesting. It's not even just about resources. The fact that they're trying to bully people, not bully, or to try to convert people into their own religion also is not just about resources or getting as much land as possible. It's about just converting and controlling the minds of the people. They want to get deeper than just the surface level things. I want you to think like me. I want you to practice the way, I want you to live the way we want you to live. Just that desire for that much control is just crazy to me. It's like the fact that there's people and there's regimes out here who just want as much control as possible, not just tangible things, but your mind. They want your mind. they want your life. But that's crazy. So listeners, do it with that what you will. I think that's a good framing for how you just move in this world, deciding the things you want to support and what you want to put your time, attention, and money into. These are the things that are happening behind the scenes, and you get to see how these things are framed. Also, it feels like everything is marketing also, like how things are presented to you so that you're able to consume them and understanding what you're endorsing when you do watch these things. So make our decisions. It's between you and God. You got to live with it at the end of the day. We're just here to provide you some information. And there's no better person to do it than the Adam Bomb. That's why he's here on the Whole Lawyer podcast. And he will be back. Any final words for the listeners?
Final words again, folks. Like again, thank you, Akeem, for letting me be here. I had a lot of fun with this discussion. I would just say, and I'll say this like every time, like I love talking about this, and I love educating to the extent that I can along the way. But really, folks, like don't just take my word for everything. Do your own research, educate yourselves, not just on this, any subject. Do your best to inform yourself. Don't just take your opinion straight from me. And actually, what I say here, challenge it. Look at primary sources, and just think critically. And that's what it's all about.